All right. Ari Temkin is with us. And if you don't know more about Ari, you can find him daily on the Big 12 Today. That's 8 to 11 Eastern on the Big 12 Radio, which is available via the Tunein app. Ari, thanks for taking some time to join us here on the Sons of UCF.
Appreciate you, Adam. Thank you.
Let's start bigger picture. We'll get into some of the new stuff this year, but how surprised were you that the Gus Malzahn experience did not work out at UCF? Obviously, Gus came to UCF with a track record at Auburn, had some success there, but I think by all accounts, you would say probably not the success that he thought he would have at UCF. How surprised were you that that marriage did not work out?
Yeah, I guess I'm fairly surprised. I mean, a year ago, if you would have told me that, Gus Malzahn would be one of the few Big 12 coaches that would be out of a job, I probably would have been pretty surprised. But I think the way that the season worked out, it wasn't a surprise by the time we got to the end of it. I mean, this was a team that had fairly high expectations, I would say, last year. Year one was sort of a wash, I think, of getting a better sense of being in the Big 12. And obviously, as we know, this is a program at UCF that's used to winning and winning a lot of games, especially at home, and that did not happen year one. But I think year two, with what returned, the offensive line they had, the defensive line, RJ Hunter, there were certainly questions at quarterback, but you felt pretty good about it, especially going into the year. And I think, things started to unravel with the quarterback situation, and, it really never took off from there. And I think like 3 games into the year, it looked like, oh, UCF could be like a dark horse Big 12 title contender. And, just all unraveled for them. And by the time we got to the end of the season, I figured either he was going to be fired or leave in his own volition, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, obviously, the quarterback did not work out for UCF. KJ Jefferson was not the answer. And then they played any number of roulette reel of quarterbacks after that to try to find the answer. Never did. Gus goes to Florida State as an OC, which I think was surprising to all of us. But, we wish him well as that takes place. But then there's an opening, Ari. And so take me to that for a second. So Gus is gone. The job is open. Terry Mohajir, who I know you're probably familiar with in your time at Kansas, who played at Kansas, comes from Kansas, had a job opening. How attractive do you think that UCF job was when it came open, when Gus left, before, obviously, the hire that was made? How attractive do you think that UCF job was?
I mean, I could imagine it's pretty attractive. There's only 4 quote-unquote power conferences at this point in time. And then when you look at deeper within these conferences, there's only X amount of specific jobs, right? So, if you're looking at the total hierarchy of jobs, having any Power 4 job is fairly high. And then, obviously you have to take into account the fact that, UCF is in a fertile recruiting base, has a ton of fans, has a really great facility, with tons of fan support. So I don't know if I could sit here and give you an exact number, but yeah, I would imagine on the scope of, being a Power 4 conference team, being in the state of Florida with heavy recruiting and great high school football. And on top of that, a huge fan base, big alumni base, all that would make it a fairly attractive job. So, is it Texas or Alabama or Georgia? No, but I don't think it's the bottom third of the Power 4 either.
Well, the name that comes out as getting that job was Scott Frost. So I don't want to lead the witness on this, but so Scott Frost is hired as UCF's head football coach, and your reaction and your thoughts are what?
Yeah, that one was a head scratcher, if I'm being honest. And look, I like Terry Mohajir. I have a lot of respect for him and think he's really good at his job, and was able to catch up with him in Orlando at the spring meetings. And, we had a lot of good discussions. So, I don't want to kill the hire from Terry before it's even had any time to develop, but it's funny because it's super comparable to West Virginia hiring Rich Rod, and there's really no comparison other than these are guys that previously coached at these spots that left for bigger opportunities that are now coming back. The difference though is Rich Rod has had recent success being a head coach in college football since then. He went to Jacksonville State, and obviously it's not the same level, but his offense still works. And so I think there's just a proof that even though, Rich Rod had his failures outside of West Virginia after leaving, that it still works. His offense still works. It was one of the best offenses in college football last year. And so there's proof that this thing works. With Scott Frost, we last saw him. He was on the scene in Nebraska and was being fired in a pretty, not a great situation. So, I know he has he's spent some time with Sean McVay and the Rams. He spent some time kind of around different programs and has, taken a master's degree, so to speak, and gotten a sense of, what he, some of his blind spots. But then he comes back, and I think he brings back some of the same coaches that he had previously. So I don't know, just some of the things that have happened from the start of this that rubbed me the wrong way. I also thought, like, what I saw from Dylan Risk last year, I would have liked to see more. I get the impression that if Risk had been named the starter coming out of spring, that he probably would have stuck around. Now, maybe you don't name him a starter coming out of spring because he didn't show you enough. But I get the feeling now in the quarterback room that, like, man, I'd much rather have Dylan Risk than anything that they have right now. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but just from the outside looking in, it's like it feels like everything that's been done since Frost has been hired has not been the right move. And again, I'm going to allow Frost some time here, a little bit of grace, because he's just taken over. But 40 new players in the roster, you expect that with the new coach coming in. And I just don't know what we're going off of from past successes beyond what he did at UCF, which was a lifetime ago at this point.
Lots of reaction there. Let me start with this, though. So why do you think Terry Mohajir made this hire then, right? I think the thing that's really interesting, Ari, is that this, most folks in power positions, they want to hire their guy, right? They want their guy. This was Terry's second football hire. Obviously, Gus did not work out. And so there's a lot of pressure on him to make a really good hire. He pulls back into the past of UCF and brings in Scott Frost, who everyone remembers from 2016, 2017, when Terry wasn't even there. Why do you think Terry dips back into the past and makes this hire? Why do you think Frost was, or maybe you had a chance to talk to him about it while you're in Orlando, why do you think Frost was the guy that he wanted to lead the program?
So I think, and he said this to us at the spring meetings, basically, like, he went in with an open mind in his conversation with Scott Frost, but I think, he had to be, it was clear that Mohajir had to kind of be blown away by Scott Frost. So it's not as if he went into his initial conversations with Scott Frost saying, this is going to be the guy, which is a lot of times the way it goes, like a confirmation bias kind of thing. Like, I think he's the guy, so I'm going to look for reasons for why I like him. I think it was kind of the opposite of that. So that stands out to me. Like, he kind of blew him away in a sense, in terms of, like, here's what I've learned. Here's what I think. Here's how I think we can win. Here are the takeaways that I had. Now, I think it also doesn't hurt the fact that, you've had success with this guy in this program. Does he fire up a fan base because you're not reliving the past, but reigniting those pasts? And how much does that play into it? I think that's a part of it. It's a product of it. But I think it starts with, we think he's going to be a good football coach because here's the things that he told me in the interviews that I think I was looking for, and maybe reasons for why I didn't want to hire him initially. And he came out and kind of, took the opposite approach that maybe I thought he was going to take. And that blew me away. But yeah, I mean, it's also hard to look away from the fact that there's that common history and that the success. And, I'm curious, like, how does the fan base feel about Scott Frost coming back? Is it like, oh, this is a retread? What are we doing here? Because when it first happened, my initial thought was like, oh, this will fire up the fan base, but I don't know anymore.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think outside of, like, I don't know, like a Nick Saban or some pie in the sky name, I think this was the name you could give UCF fans where they would at least give you some grace and go, okay, like, hey, this may work out, right? Because you're going to think back to 16 and 17, the success he had. Your argument about his time in Nebraska, 16 and 31 there is certainly valid. I think Knight fans would tell you more talent in Florida. His system worked better here. It's just a better fit for him. It's more low key than Nebraska. The pressure kind of got to him. Some other stuff happens off the field, yada, yada, yada. So I think most fans are cautiously optimistic that Frost can turn it around. I do think there's a sense of resignation that it's not going to be this year, that it's going to be a tough road to hoe. You mentioned 40 new players. I think they're up to 60 at this point now when you add in the spring portal, right? So 60 new guys coming in. Frost in Orlando for the meeting basically said there are some guys who are in meeting rooms who don't know who the heck is sitting next to them on the left and the right because they're all brand new. So I think for everything that's there, this was the home run hire Terry Mohajir could make. Now, to your point, it's a high risk reward. Because if Frost goes in there and craps the bed for all intents and purposes, like this is the last hire Mohajir is going to make, right? So he's got to hit a home run with this one. So I think there's, outside of like a Nick Saban or pulling a Steve Sarkisian or some giant name, I think this was the name Knight fans were going to be most excited about coming back here.
And I think we have to be realistic. I mean, finances are what they are. I'm curious if, all things being equal, if UCF would have moved on from its basketball coach, if it could, without having to eat some money. So I think, like, it's important to note here that money is a huge piece to this. And, UCF is now just having the full allotment of Big 12 money, right? So it's important to note that like the last couple of years, UCF's been getting a half share. So on top of that, they're trying to make up for what other Big 12 schools get from a television revenue standpoint, while still trying to build up facilities, spend as much money as possible. So I think, give Mohajir credit for maximizing the hire based upon the fact that they're not fishing in the same pools for coaching in terms of how much money they could spend. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. And I think, UCF is going to put as much money towards football as they possibly can and prioritize football over other sports. But money's a thing here. And it's not as if they were in on, we can hire any coach at any price. You're probably looking at coordinators that could have come in, like a Gus Malzahn, that maybe somebody that was an up and coming coordinator to become a head coach. But, your chances are you're not going to be getting a sitting head coach. And so I think, Mohajir had to look at the landscape of what his budget was. And I think the benefits of Frost that you mentioned far outweighed some of the potential negatives here, which are, where's the proof that he could still do this?
Well, I think the other thing I would share is, and I obviously, spoiler alert, I wasn't in the conversations with Terry and Scott. I wasn't there, just FYI. But I think from what Terry has said and what we've heard, he looked across the table and Scott Frost was a guy who wanted to be in Orlando. Right, wrong, or indifferent, UCF has kind of become a bit of a stepping stone job.
No,
right?
Great point.
Frost, right? Frost leaves for better pastures. Then obviously you see Josh Heupel leave for Tennessee, right? You bring in a Gus Malzahn, who there was always rumors around. Is Arkansas sniffing around? Is he going to stay? Is this his last job? And you look across at a guy who can probably look Terry in the eye and said, I've been those other places, dude. This is where I want to be. This is where I was happiest. So it's all well and good, man. Like everyone wants to be at a job and they're happy, but if you suck at that job, you're not there long enough. So we'll see how that works out for Frost and for Mohajir.
Well, it's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up because if you're Terry Mohajir and you're going through this process and there's a bunch of up and coming offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators you're looking at, you know there's a shelf life there. Like, I mean, like Kenny Dillingham is a home run for Arizona State because he's from Arizona. And like he went to Arizona State and he's not leaving. But another coach, if Kenny Dillingham is from New York, like he's gone after last year. He's probably going somewhere else. So I think to Mohajir's point, like anybody, best case scenario, I hire this great up and coming offensive coordinator that comes in, wins a bunch of games for me, and then he's off and out the door because he's looking for a bigger, better opportunity. Whereas Scott Frost knows, that best case scenario with him is he's successful and he knows how good it is here and he built something that's sustainable long-term. So I completely agree with that line of thinking as well.
In terms of quarterback, I mean, you mentioned Dylan Risk, obviously, who's moved on. He's at Stanford now. I mean, he showed flashes last year. I think Frost wants a little bit more mobility in his quarterback, right? And Risk, I think, had a decent arm. I don't think he had the strongest arm on the group. But look, you're kind of in a rebuild year, right? So you bring in a couple young guys. You're bringing the Taven Jackson from Indiana, who's got some upside. Ja'Carri Brown is at UCF, spent some time in Miami, was there last year, right? So bringing Cam Fancher, who's got some experience, although he hasn't won a ton of ball games at Marshall and FAU. He's got some experience. So I think the Risk move was more just about like what puts us in position to win right now, who fits my offense. And as soon as you say, hey, I'm not sure you're the guy, unfortunately, as you know, in college athletics, they're in the portal, right? So I wonder if Risk had stayed, would he have the ability to compete for that job? Would he have been able to compete? But going into the spring, if Frost was like, hey, I'm not ready to name a guy yet. Like, it may not be you. Let's just see. And I don't know if that drove Risk out. But I think I have a sense if Risk was the guy, he would have been the guy. Like, they would have said, hey, you're the guy. So something must have not gelled there that made Frost comfortable letting him say, hey, if you don't want to be here, then go ahead and move on.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Adam. Like, it's about mobility. I mean, look at the guys they brought into the portal. Look at the guys that are still there. My guess is they told Risk that he could compete for the job and that he felt like, I'm the best guy you got. I can go somewhere else. And that's what played out. But again, if you're looking for mobility, then Risk isn't your guy. Fancher to me is not dual threat. He's more one threat, which is running the football. He's not really much of a passer.
Heck, his only threat, unfortunately, has been turning the ball over, which is not the threat we want at UCF. But to be fair, he's played under some tough lines at FAU and Marshall. He had some injuries. He's kind of dinged up now. He hurt his hand at the end of spring practice. So my sense would be it's a two-person race between Jackson and Brown, but again, no inside info on that one. But I think Fancher's that in case of emergency and you need a veteran and everybody else has gotten injured, you need someone who can just get in and out of the huddle and command the offense. I think Fancher's your guy, but I don't know that they look at him and go, wow, that guy's going to lead us to the Big 12 title. I don't think that's how they think of Cam Fancher.
Yeah, and to me, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, like Taven Jackson's probably if he wins, I think that'd be really good news for UCF. Like I think just there's a lot more upside there than there probably is for Brown. I know Brown was also highly recruited, but Jackson I think was a 4-star coming out of high school. Hasn't showed much in Indiana, but I just get the sense that Jackson has much more upside at this point. And we've obviously we've seen a little bit of Ja'Kerry Brown. I don't know who started the most games last year for UCF because all of the names run along, and it feels like they all had equal time. Maybe Risk started the most games or played the most, but we saw Brown, and with Jackson, it's like there seems to be more opportunity there from what we haven't seen. I will say the other part to this too is what I heard from Frost coming out of spring was a little concerning, just in terms of like how he went to handle the transition. He said, and I wrote this quote down so I wouldn't forget it as we head into media days, talking about it's good and bad in terms of handing over the entire offensive playbook. He said, quote, "We skipped over and flew over a lot of detail that we're going to have to circle back and cover, but that was the plan. Rather than to be simple and fine tune everything before we move on, we wanted to throw out the majority of the playbook at them and let them at least have heard it and digested it and understand what it means. Summer's going to be important for us. Fall camp will be really important for us to put the finishing touches on a lot of things." That's very troubling to me. I would rather, why not pare down your offensive playbook and make it much more simplistic? I know a lot of offenses now are run where you basically have like 4 or 5 total plays, but they're just run out of different formations with different personnel. So that's what makes it more complex. But I think it's a lot more simplistic for guys to understand. Now, again, long-term, I think you've hit the nail on the head here. This is like expectations for UCF should be very low. Whether they're going to finish 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, somewhere I would think bottom third of the league. Now, I'm surprised that some of these preseason prognostications have them higher, but like you said, this is a rebuilding year. And so if in total rebuild mode, I think that approach is fine. I just worry like what's a huge, how many games do you have to win? That's not a huge detriment long-term. Now, granted, Kenny Dillingham won 3 games year one, had 60 new players in year 2 and won a conference title and looks like one of the top programs in the country right now. Right. So maybe they win 3 games. Maybe UCF wins 3 games next year. They have 62 players again and going into the following season and go and win a Big 12 championship. Crazier things have happened, clearly.
Well, yeah, let me ask you that question. If you were wearing a black and gold UCF polo right now and you were rooting for the Knights, what would be a reasonable win total expectation that you should have? Where do, again, bowl eligibility? Is it just win a couple? Like, what do you think is a reasonable number of wins that if you were a Knight fan that you would go, okay, like I feel good about this number. It shows me that we're building.
Yeah. I mean, so it's hard to look at a Big 12 schedule before the season starts and really get a good sense of how tough of a schedule it is. I hope for some more consistency at the top of the conference, but like from preseason perspective, like the top teams to me, Arizona State, Texas Tech, Kansas State, Iowa State, BYU. I even think Utah's in the mix there, maybe Kansas. So now I look at their schedule and they get at BYU, at Texas Tech. Baylor's another team I didn't mention there that probably should be considered, Kansas and Kansas State. So like, again, it's hard to tell preseason wise how good the Big 12 is going to be and which teams are going to be good, but just based on what we think today, I mean, they're getting the majority of the top teams in the projected top of the Big 12 with the exception of Arizona State. So I think that's tough. They get North Carolina in the non-conference. I think North Carolina is going to be an absolute joke this year because I just, what's happening with off the field with them, I just can't imagine that's going to be successful. But they open the season with another Big 12 team, so that'll be a good litmus test for them. So, but North Carolina still should be in a better position than UCF should be this year, even, year one for Frost, year one for Belichick. So, I mean, I think bowl eligibility would be insane. Like that would be an incredibly good season for UCF, in my opinion. 3 wins probably would be okay. Anything less than that would not be. And then again, there's important context here, right? Like, did it look like they developed a quarterback that you could count on towards the future, but he got hurt? Or, did it look like they just spun their tires constantly on offense? And what we're just talking about there in terms of installing an entire offense during spring and then, fine tuning some of those specific details during summer and fall. So I think obviously context is important overall, but yeah, I mean, I think bowl eligibility would be a miraculous season for them. And that would be an incredible success. And I think, 3 wins is probably the basement.
Obviously, to your point, there's a lot of time left. Big 12 Media Day is coming up in a couple of weeks by the time you and I are talking here. Who do you have kind of in that short list of teams that you think could be playing in the Big 12 championship game?
Yeah, I'm trending towards, Arizona State, which is obvious because of what they did last year and what they return. And, if I'm rooting for the conference overall, I think consistency at the top is going to be key. I do think Utah is going to be a team that's going to have a surprise season. So I'm tempted to go with Arizona State and Utah because there's going to be a surprise team in the Big 12. And it just feels like Utah. I mean, they're always a good defensive team, regardless of who they have from a personnel standpoint. And then they bring in Devin Dampier as the quarterback who comes over with his offensive coordinator. So I think just that familiarity for the quarterback and offensive coordinator will be huge. But yeah, so I guess if you're asking me today, I would say like Arizona State, Utah. But I mean, Texas Tech probably is in that conversation. Baylor too. And look, when we think about what's good for the conference, Texas Tech has gone out and spent a ton of money. Yeah. They've really hit the portal hard. So like success for Texas Tech would be good for the conference because they're building in a way that's never happened before. We talk about the blue chip ratio a lot, which is you need 50% of your roster to be 4 or 5-star recruits over a 4-year period. And those teams, in the modern era of recruiting have all won championships. No team outside of that threshold has ever won a championship. So, Texas Tech can certainly challenge that with the way they've built their roster. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we're going to get one team we expect to be there and one team we don't expect to be there. So I'll go with Arizona State and Utah, which still sort of seems like chalk based on Utah being a heavy favorite last year. But that's, I really believe in Sam Leavitt. I think what Kenny Dillingham is doing is there's just nobody like him. And the fact that they've got, another potential top 10, top 15 pick in Jordan Tyson. I think a lot more will be put on Arizona State, but I think they've got the pieces in order to make it work, even without Scadaboo.
All right, we've talked in our show that we think the coach in the Big 12 under the most pressure on the hottest seat is actually Joey McGuire because of what you just said. Texas Tech went out and spent a ton of money. If they're not competing for the Big 12 championship this year, what does that mean for him? What do you make of what Texas Tech has done? They haven't, they're not really shy about it, right? You see it in softball right now. They're basically saying, hey, our wallet is bigger than yours. Our oil money is better than whatever money you have, and we're going to go out and spend it on that. UCF was impacted by that. A defensive lineman, Lee Hunter, leaves UCF to go to Texas Tech. Rumored 7 figures involved in that transaction. What do you make of Texas Tech? And maybe is Joey McGuire on some sort of hot seat this year if he's not able to get them in contention for that championship game?
Yeah, I mean, Lee Hunter, it's crazy to think he barely cracks probably their top 5 in terms of players they brought in through the portal. And that says a lot about the players they brought into the portal, not about Lee Hunter. Lee Hunter's a hell of a player. And I think he's going to be a huge piece to what they're doing. And obviously was really good for UCF. So I think that just shows David Bailey seems to be getting the most headlines who they picked up, in the latest cycle from Stanford, who's a big time pass rusher. They brought in a 6'7" monster at left tackle, Howard Sampson from North Carolina. I mean, there's a ton of talk around Skylar Gill-Howard. So another guy to add to the mix in terms of, what they have, on their defensive line along with Lee Hunter. So I do tend to agree with you in terms of who has the most pressure on them. It's sort of funny because the things that Joey McGuire has done in his first 3 years at Texas Tech are unprecedented at Texas Tech in terms of the amount of wins, bowl appearances, bowl wins, etc. Like the only other coach to even equal that is Mike Leach. So in some ways he's undervalued because Texas Tech, I think because of Mike Leach, has a much larger view of itself. And I'm not disparaging Texas Tech. They think very highly and have high expectations for their football program. In some ways, probably similar to UCF, to where you've had some really high level success. And so you expect that should always be the case. And, with Texas Tech in the post Mike Leach era, all they've been doing is trying to get back to exactly what Joey McGuire has done his first 3 years as the head coach there. So on the one hand, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on him to win. And if they don't win, I don't know what what does that mean? Do they have to win 9 games, 10 games? They have to, win the Big 12. They have to get I don't know exactly what that looks like, but yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of pressure on Joey to win and then win at a level that if he doesn't, he may lose his job. But it's, again, also important to note that what he's done the first 3 years at Texas Tech, few other coaches have done before. So he has had success despite it looking like he's constantly, underperforming relative to overvalued expectations. And that's what it is. They seem to be getting praise every offseason. McGuire's a big talker, and I'm a big fan of McGuire's, and he has recruited at a high level based on his history of being a Texas high school football coach. So expectations have gotten to a point that are really difficult. The other one I would say is Dave Aranda, and it feels like he's constantly oscillating between hot seat and best coach of the Big 12. And I mean, look, they finished up very strong last year. This was a team that a year ago, it looked like Daquan Finn was going to be their starter, who transferred in, from Dayton or Akron, wherever it was.
Toledo.
And what's that?
I think it was Toledo.
Toledo. Thank you. I knew it was a MAC school. This is one MAC school, just one of the Ohio schools. But obviously we saw how good Sawyer Robertson was, and he took over. So I think expectations, like they're very underrated on the national landscape. But I think if Baylor is not a team you're competing towards 9-10 wins this year, we could also be looking at Dave Aranda, because they just have not had enough consistency in terms of like just peaks and valleys every year. It's like they won a Big 12 title and then they nosedive, and then they're back up again and then nosedive. And you've got to capitalize the momentum from last year too there. So I would probably put Dave Aranda in that category as well from an underrated standpoint.
All right, I learned pretty quickly, if you're going to do content around the Big 12 and you want to do numbers, all you have to do is say one word, and that's Colorado. And I feel odd because we're not saying that word a lot right now, because there isn't a lot of buzz around Colorado. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter leaving, but Coach Prime, Dion's still there. What do you make of Colorado post Travis, post Shedeur? What should we expect out of the Buffalo program?
Yeah, it's a great observation on your part, Adam. The piece to me that stands out more than anything is it's great that the league is now standing on other headlines. Like, I've read a lot of offseason pieces so far on Kenny Dillingham, on Sam Levitt, on the Arizona State program. I've read a decent amount on Texas Tech, right? So the fact that the hype train has sort of bypassed Colorado and hasn't had to pick up steam in other conferences, like this has still been able to pick up conference teams, is huge, because nobody was writing about Arizona State last year. Very few were writing about Texas Tech last year. Everybody was writing about Colorado and Dion. And that's all the talk there was. So number one, like, it's big. The Big 12 is starting to stand on its own footing without just Dion. But yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting season. I mean, with this sickness and illness that Dion's dealing with right now, notwithstanding, I mean, as long as he's been a coach in college, he's had Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders with him.
Yeah.
And so, there's been those players, guys that he one that's actually his son and one that he views as his son, and Travis. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a brand new chapter for Dion. It's a brand new chapter for Colorado. There's still a ton of momentum around that program. I talked earlier about the blue chip ratio. There's no Big 12 team that's, that fits that category of having their last 4 classes be 50% or more 4 or 5-star recruits. You're looking at Ohio State and Georgia that are like 70, 80%. Well, Colorado is the closest Big 12 school to that blue chip ratio, because they've had 2 recruiting classes under Dion that have been over 50% 4 or 5-star recruits. So that's huge when you look at the conference overall in terms of recruiting and the characteristics of championship squads as we've seen from an observation, from an analysis standpoint. But I mean, I'm super intrigued. I mean, he wasn't at Big 12 meetings in Orlando. He was the only coach that was not there. And then now we hear that, he wasn't on campus for, some of these high school showcases that they bring in. And for a guy that's, as a head coach, not recruiting on site, being on campus for those high school visits, for those high school camps is huge. So I think like that was a big sign that he had to miss those due to what he's dealing with. So, I mean, regardless of when he gets back on campus and starts, he's already behind the 8 ball in terms of like readiness and preparedness. So, I've seen a lot of preseason lists that have UCF ranked higher in their polls than Colorado. And I'm starting to buy that. I'm just saying the UCF thing because I'm on this show, but like there are a lot of people that are very low on Colorado. Now, with that being said, they still have arguably the best left tackle in this conference. And this is a very good offensive line conference that has, arguably 2 top 20 picks at left tackle, including Jordan Seaton, from Colorado, who I think showed a ton of growth last year as a true freshman. Remember, he's not even draft eligible after this season. I mean, Caden Salter, I think in a perfect world, he steps in as a transfer quarterback and plays and then provides a bridge to Juju Lewis, who's their, 5-star freshman quarterback coming in that should be a stud. So, and like what they've recruited in the portal through the wide receiver position, like they're stacked at wide receiver, what they've done in the portal that way. So the talent is there. Like Texas Tech may have the most talent top to bottom in the conference, but Colorado's right there. So I think I'm interested to see from a coach perspective how this illness, what that will take its toll on this team. But there's a ton of talent there, and even without Shedeur and Travis Hunter.
Again, you can catch Ari weekdays 8 to 11 Eastern on Tunein Radio on the Big 12 Today. All right, year 3 for UCF going into the Big 12. You mentioned basketball earlier. Haven't really made a lot of inroads there. Football certainly has been some struggle. Baseball fell off the map. Softball is doing okay, but in general, how would you grade UCF's move into the Big 12? Kind of, and where do you think they stack up in just in terms of overall hierarchy as they enter the 3rd year of their Big 12 citizenship?
I mean, look, I think I'm not telling you something you don't already know. And that is like UCF has the potential in a lot of these sports. UCF, I think softball is probably where you start here. It's a young team, played really well. Obviously didn't make it to the College World Series, but got to the NCAA tournament like that. That's big. So I think like in terms of taking stock of all of the programs right now, maybe UCF softball on the best footing. UCF baseball has potential here based on the state of Florida and the talent that Florida has overall. And we see a ton of great baseball coming out of the state of Florida, not just, at the high school level, but JUCO and lower levels on and on and on and on. Obviously football, I think, has been a disappointment, and I don't think I'm surprising anybody when I say that. Now, with that being said, like it's a pretty significant step up from the American to the Big 12. And I don't know how big of a jump we thought it was, but obviously now we've seen it. And for a program that rarely lost games at home before joining the Big 12, it's a different reality in this conference. And look, the Big 12 itself is a league of parity. So like, it's not as if there were teams at the top and then teams at the bottom. So you can kind of tell on a year by year basis who you can pencil in as wins versus who you can pencil in as losses. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the schedule. So like, I guess what I'm saying in a roundabout way is, yeah, they've been disappointing in football, but it's a huge step up. They were getting significantly less money than their counterparts. And you're already behind the 8 ball because you were in the American making, a fraction of what Big 12 schools were already making. So you're trying to play catch up from a revenue standpoint. And meanwhile, you're still playing catch up, getting half the amount of money. Like half the amount of money that the Big 12 is getting is still significantly more than you're getting the American, but it's not enough compared to the other teams you're competing against. So that's tough. Like it's not a straight line between money and winning, but it's close and it helps. And so UCF is in a tough spot because you're trying to make up for the fact that you weren't making nearly as much money previously with half the amount of money. And you could point to BYU, but BYU is a different animal because they've got way deeper pockets from alums and from the church and on and on and on. So like, I don't even think that's a good comparison. The comparisons really here are to other American schools. And I think when you look at Cincinnati, you look at UCF, you look at Houston, they're all very similar. The only difference being Houston basketball, and that's just an anomaly. I hope that Johnny Dawkins, I like Johnny Dawkins as a person. I think he's a good coach, but I feel like the way he's assembled the rosters the last couple of years is not a great way in order to build a team that could be a perennial tournament contender. So like you got to build by trying to get 3 and 4-year guys that buy into the fact that you're Johnny Dawkins and can teach them and get them to the next level. I think, trying to get Keyshawn Hall and Jordan Ivy Curry, like these guys that are flat out good scorers. Like I think you need to build more of a culture there and not take some of these, 1 year in, 1 year out transfer guys as good as Keyshawn Hall might've been. Like clearly he was really good, but didn't help towards winning. So long-winded answer to say like softball from where I sit. And again, you probably have a better sense of this knowing all the sports, but softball where I sit right now looks like it's on the best trajectory. But we know that football, baseball, and even basketball to a degree could be a sleeping giant, but definitely football and baseball. Basketball is tough because this conference is so good. And, you can't invest everywhere. Like the problem is you're not like, there's a ton of schools. I went to Kansas. Kansas is going to invest way more money than UCF ever can. And especially if UCF is trying to, leverage football, which they should be, you're going to spend more money in football and they should. So, yeah, I overall, I'd say football's been a disappointment, but it makes sense based on what we've seen and how big of a jump it was. I think softball's on a really good trajectory, and I, expect both baseball and football to be better, to be considerably better.
Obviously, you cover the conference at large. What's the perception of UCF, you think, in the conference and other schools, other programs, other fan bases? What's the perception of the Knights?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, ultimately, I think, not much from a football perspective. Again, going back to expectation when they came in, this is going to be a big time program because of what they've been able to do. And it just, for whatever reason, has not felt like that. I mean, but again, like there's so many resources there in terms of assets, I should say, not resources, in terms of they're now calling it the Bounce House officially, right? It's not going to be FBC Mortgage. Way better name.
For sure. Bounce House. Just
he
rolls off the tongue.
Just with apologies to Acro, sure, just call it the bounce house. It's great. It's what it's always been called, and that thing does move and bounce. So like, there's a shtick there. There's a brand there. I think like people show up, like that helps in recruiting. This is one of those things that like I could be completely wrong about Scott Frost, and he wins. You know, he wins 4 or 5 games this year, and then goes and blows the doors off year 2, and suddenly now this thing rolls downhill because he's going to be there long term, and they've got great recruiting coming in, and they know what kind of facilities they have, and the stadium, and on and on and on. But yeah, I mean, I think from a perception standpoint, it's, you know, I mean, it's these are easily winnable games at this point in time against UCF.
I think I'm obligated, if I'm doing a sports talk show about college athletics, to ask you about the house settlement. And here's the trick, Ari. You and I can end this call, and 10 minutes later, something's going to change. So right. I'm not going to get into specifics with you, but I would like your perspective on this. Can you, looking at the house settlement, everything that's coming with that, right? And what's one thing good that you like about house, and what's one thing that is scary or concerns you about house?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think it is a good thing, you know, that schools have to pay parts of the amount of revenue they're getting to athletes. I mean, if these guys are appearing on television, then clearly there's a benefit that they serve that they should benefit from. So like, just on premise alone, I think the rev share is a good thing. Now it sucks for schools because this was money that they didn't have to pay previously that they now have to pay and account for. The other thing that you know, Terry Mohajir and I disagreed on was, you know, and this is maybe the scary part, although I would argue it's just the legal part of it. Like, to me, there is no way that the Deloitte clearinghouse for third party NIL deals is going to stand up in a court. Like there's in literally no other area of our free capitalist markets do we have a AI model deciding what is and what is not fair market value. So like, I see absolutely no way that holds up in court. And so, and Mohajir said this to me, like, why would we agree to this rev share if that didn't do that? And my answer to him was, don't settle, because you are going to lose out when it comes to that third party NIL stuff with Deloitte. Now, look, there's workarounds, even if it did hold up in court, to where you could say, oh, this is not the booster that's paying me. This is a third party business that's paying me. Like, I just like, if somebody wants to pay you to do something, you can't really stop them from doing it. That's kind of the way the free market works, right? Like if somebody came in and said, Adam, I'm going to pay you $1 million a year to keep doing this, like, even if that's a bad investment, and I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying like nobody's going to stop that from happening. Yeah. The only thing that stops it is if it's a bad investment and suddenly they're not getting a good return on it. But that may not happen in college sports because the return is based on how much talent you can bring in. I'm not even sure I'm against that. You know, quite frankly, I think it's better that way. So ultimately, I think there are many elements of this house settlement that are going to lose in the court of law. And like, what's going to happen is they have to come to a situation in which they're going to have to collectively bargain. They cannot. Right now, the NCAA is creating rules off of the house settlement that have not been collectively bargained. So none of those rules are going to stand up in court because they didn't agree to it. So, and people hear collective bargaining, and I think they think, man, that sounds like a disaster. I'm not saying it isn't. And quite frankly, Adam, I think it works better for the universities than it does for the actual athletes themselves in collective bargaining, because right now they've got a great situation. They can literally sue under any guise and probably practically win because of no collective bargaining. And they're not employees, which I think is a benefit to them. They become employees, they collectively bargain. I think that's the way that this thing gets solved, because just like all other pro sports in America, the only way that they get away with not being an antitrust is that they collectively bargain between the owners and the players and then create rules off of that. Right now, the NCAA is trying to create rules under this College Sports Commission, and all of those rules are going to be broken down because they have not collectively bargained those rules. Nobody on the other side has agreed to them.
Ari, if you're like me, you spend 15 hours a week talking on microphones. I assume you like sports a lot. One of the questions we got this week in our mailbag segment is from a longtime viewer of our show who was like, look, I'm sick of, like, college athletics is driving me crazy. Like, I used to love this, but every day it's court orders, it's injunctions, it's Deloitte, it's everything, right? You're obviously representing and talking to fans every single solitary day as part of your show. What do you say to the fan out there that's like, dude, I'm so sick of this. Like, I am like, there's just over all this. What do you say to that fan to help maybe get them through? Or how do you kind of deal with that when people, ping your show and say, like, you guys just talk about the actual games? I'm sick of hearing about courtrooms and lawyers and lawsuits and judges. And why do I know the name of a federal judge in California? I should have no business knowing Wilkins' last name, but for some reason we all do if you follow college sports, right? What do you say to the fans who are frustrated with where things are right now?
Us too.
Sure.
You know, I mean, yeah, look, I don't want to talk about it as much as you don't want to hear about it. And that may lead people to say, well, then why talk about it? Because this is the foundation of the sport that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Like, this sport doesn't exist without it. So, like I say it all the time, I'm not a lawyer, but sometimes I play on the radio. Like, I feel like I need to go to law school just to get a better sense of what's happening right now, because it's massively confusing. You know, it sucks. It sucks for the general public. I think like the transfer portal in some ways sucks for the general public. You know, you want to know on a year in and year out basis who's going to be on your team. Like, look at UCF basketball. Feels like every year it's a brand new team. That's not a sustainable way to build a fan base and to grow it. Like, that sucks. That's not great. So, but ultimately, like, the numbers show a different reality. We may hate it and not want to hear about it, but we're consuming the sport and sports content around this sport at a larger degree than we ever had before. So people may be sick of it, but there's literally no credible evidence suggests they're turning off the television and not watching these football games. The only, the insane amount of growth that we've seen from college football and the NFL, like, there's no sport that comes close to it. It's the NFL and college football, and then nobody. I mean, if you looked at the top 100 most consumed broadcasts in the United States last year, the majority of them, over 70% of them, are NFL football games, and then 2 of them are college football games. But there's no NBA, no Major League Baseball, no NHL, no college basketball. Nobody's scratching that top 100 list other than the NFL and college football. So, football continues to be the golden goose. Maybe they are at a point where there will be diminishing returns, and maybe we'll find out over the next few years that there are. But I think we're all fatigued by it. We all don't want to have to hear about lawsuits. I mean, I joke all the time, like, with the old, are you ready for some football? Like, are you ready for some football? Are you ready for some lawsuits? Because that's like, I mean, it's not fun to talk about. It's not fun to hear about. It's not fun. It's not fun to read about. It sucks. It's not fun. But like, you can't not talk about it. It's foundational to what we're doing. It's the game.
Obviously, you can hear Ari talk about that and a bunch of stuff, by the way, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern on Tunein Radio. Ari, tell us more about Big 12 Today, what you guys cover, how people can find you. Give some folks some more insight on what you're working on every day.
Yeah, no, appreciate that very much, Adam. Look, I think the reality is, so, Big 12 Radio was on a different platform for many years. And that platform, a huge, large voice in radio, decided that, the Big 12 was not worth investing in anymore. And so basically took us off the air. And at that point, Brett Yormark of the Big 12 shopped the rights around and found a partnership with TuneIn. But I think that says a lot about where the media and media coverage is going right now. So, like, supporting the 10-12 network, my good buddy Philip, and what you guys are doing at Sons of UCF, and the 24/7 sites, and the rival sites and the independent sites, supporting the people that support the Big 12 is huge, because basically what the major networks have said is, you don't matter. The Big 12 doesn't matter, and the Big 12 institutions don't matter enough for us to cover them. And the coverage reflects that. When you look at, the main home pages for each of these platforms, when you look at the content that's being churned out on radio, on TV, it's all geared towards the SEC and the Big 10. So, we're excited to provide a platform for all things Big 12, on TuneIn. It's an app. Download the app. If you have a Tesla, it comes native in your Tesla. And now you can find our podcasts and our interviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. But, I appreciate you asking me to come on. I'd love to come on whenever I can and have you on our show. And we need to all support each other, because a rising tide lifts all boats. And, most of the other networks are leaving the Big 12 and Big 12 fan bases behind.
He's Ari Temkin, again, 8 to 11 Eastern on Tunein Radio. Ari, thanks so much for hopping in this week and joining us on Sons of UCF.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you asking.